Hey there, welcome to today's episode. And as you can see, I've bought yet another sampler. Certainly a sampler that I don't need because I currently have the MPC 1 Plus, the SP404 Mark II, an MPC 500, and of course Koala sampler on my iPad. The only reason I bought this was because it was dirt cheap, and I'll talk all about that as we go through. This is going to be live and unedited because I'm kind of short on time at the moment. But I wanted to show you the new toy, something that will be hanging around the studio, and I think I'm probably going to keep hold of this because at this point, they're kind of like antiques, and I really enjoyed fixing this thing up, and yeah, I put a bit of personal time and effort into it. Anyway, let's boot the device up. I want to show you that in real time. We'll talk about it as we go through. You'll notice here we have this lovely lime green screen, JJOS2XL version 3.83. Because I got this thing so cheap, I decided to upgrade the OS to the full version of JJOS, and it has a lot of functions that really kind of bring this thing up to speed in the kind of modern era, particularly for 2024. And yeah, we can do a hell of a lot even on an older device. I believe these were released in around 2003 to 2005, something like that. Of course, we have this Spider-Man version that I call it, which is the the glittery blue with the burgundy red sides. And then you had like the black version, which arguably is probably a little bit easier on the eyes. Think with blue and red with a green screen, white pads, grey pads, or white buttons even, and some purple buttons. I'm not sure what Akai were thinking. I guess they were on some kind of acid trip, but it is a lot of fun, and it is built like a tank. It is a full metal construction, aside from these, plastic side panels, but generally the body, the chassis is all metal, so it's heavy, feels good, and it feels like a proper old school MPC. Now, I kind of like this era of MPC after I bought my little 500. I realized how kind of solid they felt, and actually, even the 500 with its limitations, I like the workflow. So I assume that if I bought this thing with the extra ability of sample chopping and all that kind of other good stuff, that this would really suit me, and actually, so far, it really does. So let's dive in. We're going to make a little bit of a beat sketch. I'll put some time codes into the video if you want to just skip through to certain sections, but ultimately, I want to talk you through some of the workflow, some of the options whilst cooking something up. It's not going to be anything spectacular. The overall layout, I think, is really good of this device. It's pretty compact. As I said, it's heavy, but it's got some really nice things that I like against the sort of more modern MPC. So my MPC 1 Plus, which I really love, don't get me wrong, it's not a comparison, and that's going to be staying in the studio too, I like the 2 volume knobs we have here. Because on the MPC 1 Plus, they're tucked down the back. They're little fiddly dials that you have to try and get your fingers to and adjust your main output or, your input volume. Having them right here is just so much easier. I think that was a better design. Feels kind of like the 1 and the 1 Plus because we have these classic tack switches which are nice and clicky, not the rubberized versions of like the Live 2. And I think, the S, I'm not sure what that's like actually, the SXE or whatever it's called. We have these Q-Link sliders at the side, which we'll talk about as we go through. And you'll notice on the screen, it's nice and clear, I have a custom template that boots up when you load up the device. So I just set my BPM to 80 BPM, 80 BPM. I'm a hip-hop guy, so it makes more sense than 120. I have 2 bars enabled so that it's just going to loop around. And I have the loop end enabled so that, yeah, it just continuously loops. If you don't set a loop end on this, then it just records for as long as you create your track for, which is fine. That, you probably want to use that in certain scenarios. Underneath here, I have 2 tracks. So I have a chops track and I have a drums track. Nothing particularly special about the programs, just saves me naming them because generally I'll either put some chops in or some drums or both. That's how I start a beat most times. So I just wanted to save myself a little bit of time there. If we want to load some samples in, we can get started. So we'll do some of the function shifting on this device. It's kind of like the SP. It uses kind of a shift or a mode button depending on which version of this, era sampler you have. But we can do mode, and then each of the pads represents another function, another menu, somewhere you can go. In this case, we want to load, so we're going to choose pad 2 with load, and we can load that up and take a look. One thing here, as I said, my CF card wasn't working when I bought the device. I've now fixed that. So I can access my memory card, which is the CF at the front here. But I also was privileged to get a hard drive installed on this. So if I scroll over, you can see I can access a hard disk that's internal in the device. Now, when I bought it, it had a 40 gigabyte standard old school. I think they're called SATA drives, I think. But that old school hard drive, so when you booted it up, it took a little bit of time, not too long, but it was noisy and it whined and it made a bunch of stuff. Turns out on Amazon, and I'll put a link if I in the description if I can find the part I bought, you can actually just unscrew the front panel here. I was inside this device anyway, cleaning it all up, but you can take the front panel off, take the internal hard drive out, it just slides out, and you can replace that hard drive with a little adapter that has an SD card slot on it. So you get rid of the old mechanical drive and you put this little adapter with an SD card in. And that is what we're looking at here. I have 128 gigs now, internal. It's quiet, it won't overheat. And yeah, it's pretty speedy. Doesn't matter that I can't access the SD card once the panel's all put back on, because you access the samples connecting to your computer via this USB cable, which I currently have plugged in, but of course you don't need that plugged in. But yeah, if you want to access, load new samples on, you can do all of that via your iMac, via your PC. So kind of like a very modern MPC, and 128 gig is going to be plenty of space for me. I don't have a lot loaded onto it because I've only had this thing for about a week, but I've got some samples that we can get started with. Navigating is very simple, using the data wheel or using these little buttons here. And if I go into something like the breaks folder, we might start by just chopping up some drums. Now, I am still getting familiar with this, so if you see me doing something here that there is an easier way, you have any tips and tricks for me, let me know in the comments, because I'm always keen to learn. And I've only just got to grips with the operating system. But the one thing I would like to know is that, can you auto audition samples? If anyone knows how to do that, please let me know in the comments. I would love to be able to hear the sample as I scroll through, but at the moment, and I'm not sure if you can, if you can't, doesn't really matter, but if you want to audition a sample, you have to press a pad, so doesn't matter which pad you press, but you can audition that sample and then load it in. It's not the end of the world, still speedy enough, but if you could auto audition, I'd love to know if you can do that. I haven't seen it in the manual, couldn't find it. Let's pick a drum break so that we can get going with this. Let's see what we got. In fact, actually, maybe just start with this one. I don't want to spend too long on this. One thing, though, is if we just quickly jump back to main, I wanted to make sure that I am loading this into my drum samples program. Doesn't matter because you can assign things and move them around, but just to be kind of organized, just wanted to make sure that was on the drums program. We're going to go back to mode and then load, and then I'm going to click do it. And what I like is that it picks the first pad for me, and then I can click yes. And if I pick any more samples, say we come across here, and I don't know, we picked out, let's go into drums and like a kick drum of some sort. If I load it up like the next sample, it automatically jumps down to the next free slot, which is nice and speedy, so I can just click yes and we can go from there. I'm going to click no because we don't want that just now, but it's nice that you can do that. I'm going to go back to main. Now, I have a habit of coming back to main whenever I'm working, but ultimately, if I want to just take a look at the samples and start chopping up, I can just go from mode and then pick the next menu, but main is a habit for me, so I go back to main, and then I'll do mode and whatever I'm doing next. Mode and pad 6 here is the trim mode. It's also where all the samples are kind of housed. So if we do mode and pad 6, it's kind of the sample pool and where we can begin to chop and trim samples. So all in one space, which is cool. Any sample that is currently associated with this particular project will be loaded up at this point, or it will be available to us. Now, I've got these accent sounds here, and I'll come back to that later on. So there's a couple of samples in here already, but our break is right here, and then we can start chopping this thing up. And chopping up is very cool on this. I like it. I think it's speedy enough. Doesn't feel old or like old tech. We move over to chop. Turn the chopping mode to on, of course. And now we are in this sort of non-destructive chopping environment. And you'll see I press some of the pads. There are already some chops already here. Quite a lot of them, to be honest. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to press slice. We've got a couple of options here. I'm going to stick with this main option where you can see it's given us 16 slices by default. There is an auto, so it will look for the transients like on more modern MPCs, and you can do it that way. But I kind of like this mode here, and it's kind of unusual. It's not really like manually coming along and putting a slice in. It just gives us 16 or more slices that we want. And you'll notice as I move the data wheel, I am moving by these like points of a slice, which is handy because it just means you can fine tune where the slices are and you can tweak that. And of course, I can move down and I can change the number of slices that I have. And if I want to do that quicker, I can do it in whole chunks, holding shift and move down. So if I just want like 2 slices, 4 slices, for example, we can do that. And I think that's a pretty cool way of just getting things lined up. And as I said, because we've got a point, if we just want to move this, we can see what it's like. Maybe we can just move that over ever so slightly. Might work out better for the transients and where we want things. In this case, I think we'll put it up to, I don't know, let's go back to maybe around 16 slices. And again, I can do that quicker by jumping up with the shift button. 16 slices for a break like this, which is a loop, is going to work out about right. I probably won't use all of these, but we want a few pieces we can work with. Then we will do it. And now these can be edited. And the same as I usually do, I'm a fan of manual chopping, even on my MPC 1 Plus. I still like putting the chops in manually and then just tweaking the start and end points because I enjoy the process of working that way. If you want it all to be automated for you, use auto and do it that way, but I kind of like the process of tweaking things. When I want to tweak the start and end points, I just need to drop down to where start and end is using these arrow keys. And one thing you'll notice, if I try and go back up, it starts to increase the waveform. Now, this confused me at first. Now, it's cool because, of course, maybe you've got a quiet sample. You don't want to make the sample louder, but you want to be able to take a, a sort of larger look at the waveform. That way, we can also zoom in as well, and we can zoom in using these bar buttons here, or we can zoom in using the buttons on the screen. Now, you can click them, but you can also just hold the button down, and it will zoom. It just goes quite quick. So for me, I generally tend to do like sort of steps. I like the bar buttons because they just sit naturally where my hand is, but bear in mind you can do it up here as well. But yeah, if I wanted to go back up to this top level menu here, you need to be able to press shift and then you can jump back up. Just keep that in mind. It confused me if you don't press shift. So if we drop back down and I start trying to jump back up to the top level, it starts playing with the waveform view instead. So keep that in mind. Shift will get you back up there. It's pretty handy to know. But once we've done that, this is our end points, of course, and we can move over to the start points. We can pick our first slice. So we've got this kick drum sample, which sounds pretty good already, but let's take a look at it by zooming in a bit more. And yeah, we've got it like this. If I needed to tweak the start point, because we have start highlighted, I can move that around to wherever I want. The other thing that I haven't found so far is a zero crossing, like snapping point on this. If anyone knows how to do that, there's a menu, there's a setting, let me know. It's not the end of the world, again, if it doesn't have that function, because, of course, we can do it by ear. And we just need to make sure we've got no clicks and pops here. Even if we're struggling, we can always go into Program, and you can adjust the attack and envelope of each, sample and tweak out any, little clicks and pops if you're struggling with that. But that's how we would adjust the first sample. This one sounds pretty good because it's kind of chopped it where I wanted it. We'll take that kick drum, the next one. It's kind of in between where like the hi-hat should be, really. I'm not going to worry about like cleaning up extra pads. We'll just find ones that we want. But we've got a hi-hat here, and that's really what I'm looking for. Again, I can zoom in, I can tweak this. Of course, if you need to do anything with the endpoint, it's just a case of jumping over to the endpoint. So you move back and forth between these, and then, tweak the endpoint to wherever you want that. Really simple. I think it's a pretty speedy workflow, particularly when somebody's not talking about it. They're just doing it. It's quick and easy. So I'm looking for a snare drum. Got one here. We can, again, make sure we just zoom into the start. Zoom in if you need to, if you want to be dialing this in a bit further. And with this one, what I do, I just want to look at the tail here. I might want to leave a little bit more tail. Yeah, good enough. I'm not going to go through all the chops because it would make the video quite long doing that, but you get the idea. We can chop our slices. We can do all of that. It's non-destructive. We can come back and we can tweak. I'm going to set a new program, and I can name the programs. I can name anything on this device, and it has this funky little scroll wheel thing that opens up letters where we can change this. Now, it stays on whatever you were playing with last time, so I've been making a couple of beats on this thing to get used to it, but let's call this, I don't know, we'll go drum. And again, I'm not super familiar with using this thing, so if it takes me a second, I'm sure this will become second nature. It's not going to be as quick as using the touchscreen on an MPC 1 Plus, but it's fine. It's not the end of the world. I'm also doing a terrible job of spelling here, so let's put that back as DR, and then we'll go to U, and then we'll go, because I keep skipping about then, I need to just be going forward. I need to go to drum, and to be honest, let's just call it drum sample 2 for the sake of this. We'll go enter, we'll click do it. When I go back, you'll notice my program has now changed. Now, I could have just loaded some samples into my other drum samples program that was already set up, but we've created a new one here with these chops. And everything is working as we expected. I have my kick, hi-hat, and I've got my snare. Now, you'll notice on these, this is the V1 version of these pads. They get a little bit of a bad reputation. However, once mine were all cleaned out and the sensors were checked and everything, mine work really well. This is without full level enabled. And what I really like is we have this little display in the corner here. So if I tap very lightly on, say, like the hi-hat, you can see like a very low value all the way to when you start putting some pressure on here. All the way up to 127. So we get a really good range of velocity. The pads feel nice to play. I'm not breaking my fingers having to do it. But of course, we can put it into full level as well if we want. And what we'll do is we'll begin to record something into our 2 bars. Now, I'm going to stick with, shall we stick with 80 BPM? For the sake of this episode, let's stick with 80 BPM, but of course, it's very simple to just come up and change that tempo if you want to. We have a nice little grid view here on the main screen, which I really like. There is also a more in-depth grid view where you do mode and pad 15. You can move things around, you can shift them off the grid, very similar to the MPC 1 Plus. There is a grid view. You can physically tweak things and move them around, which is pretty cool. You can copy and paste and all that kind of stuff. We'll go back to main. If we go to click, we can take a look at our metronome settings, and it has the usual things, but what is really cool is it allows you to bring in custom samples for your metronome. And what I did was I sampled Ableton's metronome because I'm very used to Ableton. I've been using it for years, and I'm not overly keen on the MPC sound of like metronome, but I could just make a sample of that. It allows me to even split that sample into 2 separate samples, one for like the accent note and one for the normal tick, because a metronome usually has that, some kind of accent note that you can hear. And you can even separate the volume of those and get it as loud as you want. So when I press record in a second and we begin to put some drum sounds here, if you're familiar with Ableton, you'll notice that it has an Ableton metronome. So that's pretty cool. Usual affair in here as well with the typical, what do you want to set it for during playback, during recording, what kind of rate. We've got one, quarter notes here. That will do us. But if I do that without even recording something in, just take a listen, but you should be familiar to the Ableton users. We do record and play start. You can hear it there. It gives me a count in because I have a count in set. I get this undo button. If I make any mistakes for my sequence, I can just undo. You can also do shift and redo by hitting the undo button, which I worked out. And we're just going to put a basic pattern in. If we want to look at timing correction, we can do shift and TC. And here, I'm going to keep it to 1/16 notes. We'll just make this episode super simple. Of course, you can turn the timing correction off. You can set it to another rate. I'm going to have a little bit of swing. And I think maybe even just shift the timing over just a little bit. Just make it ever so slightly lazy. We can do that. You can also fix afterwards. You'll notice there is a fix button. So if you put some notes in and you want to quantize after, use the timing correct, you can do that. Let's close it. But let's just record something basic in. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use just my kick drum and the snare drum for now in full volume so that we can play with 16 levels and a couple of other things so I can show you those. So let's do record, play start. And yeah, that's put that little bit of swing in there for us. Of course, it's not a crazy pattern. We're not, doing too much there, but it's got a little bit of swing. And if we take a look back at mode and pad 15 again with this edited grid view, I do believe if you do shift, you can zoom in. I don't know how far you can zoom in, but you can just about see that those notes have been moved ever so slightly off that grid. So yeah, it's put in the kind of slight lazy feel that we wanted. Go back to main. Really good functions on this. Hopefully, maybe if you're looking to these older devices and you weren't aware of the sort of JJOS, particularly the XL that does all of this fancy stuff, you might be surprised at how capable this little device is. I certainly was. So we've now got a 2-bar drum loop, 80 BPM, nice and simple. If I choose the hi-hat sample, I don't want that ticking away at full volume throughout the entire loop because it just gets irritating to me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that this is the pad we got selected. And if I click 16 levels, I can check here that that is the right one. If I needed another pad, I could do that. But we want the hi-hat, and I want to turn velocity on. Now, if you drop down, you can also play around. So 16 levels will affect velocity. We can also affect things like the tuning, like the pitch of a sample, filter, layer, attack, decay. Lots of options on this, but we're going to go with velocity. We'll turn that on. And of course, with velocity enabled, we're going to be getting a quieter sound on our lower left here, all the way up to the loudest sound on the 15th pad, or the 16th pad even, as you kind of snake through. I'll just play a few. But you can see it gets louder progressively as it goes through. We can now come back in and record those hi-hats in using some kind of pattern, just to give the hi-hats a little bit of life. We're going to do overdub because it's an MPC. It still works in exactly the same way as the newer MPCs. We want to record back into something. We don't want to do record because that will overwrite. We want to do overdub and play start. So really simple, good way of getting beats together. A couple of things now. I want to show you some other modes on here, things that I like. I'm going to turn 16 levels off. Just be wary of 16 levels because sometimes if you keep that enabled and then you're trying to do something in your program edit or something, you might get confused as to why it's not triggering a sample. It's not doing what you expect it to do. It's generally because 16 levels might still be on. What I want to show you is some of the resampling functions. So you've got basic resampling, which is mode and then the record option here. And we can basically set our input. So we've got it set to analog. There's a digital input as well. And also you've got the main output of the device. So you want to do some internal resampling. We could play these drums and we could record them at the same time and create an audio file, a wave file with those drums baked down to one wave file. Really cool because you can apply effects and you can bake all of that in and you can do that sort of stuff. But there's also another mode on this, which is very handy, similar to, again, the modern MPCs. If we come back to main, again, it's just by habit coming back to main, but we could just do mode and go over to pad 16 where we'll see song. What you'll notice is we've created one sequence and it's called Lupo1 because that's my template, sequence name. If I do song mode, we have typical song mode for the MPC, so we can put all of our sequences in, say the order that we want, how long we want them to play, and that's how you make songs. But what it also does in here, if we insert a sequence, and we only have one, but we can insert our loop here, I can mix down that sequence and it mixes down the sequence to an audio file, just basically bakes it all down. But that means it will be exactly in time, 80 BPM, loop to 2 bars, so I don't need to do any cropping or chopping like I might do if I did this in resampling mode using the kind of internal input volume. So keep that in mind. As I press mix down, it is going to record this and you'll hear it just play for the 2 bars, so let's do that. I can name it if I want to, but I know it's called Take 01 here, so we'll look for that when we need to. Notice it recording there. So now when we go back to something like mode and trim, which is where all the samples for this project are, it's already on Take 01, which is nice. But if we needed to find it, it's going to be in here somewhere along with everything else that we've created. So we now have a baked down version of that loop. We've done another step. And the reason I'm showing you this is just so that we can look at some of the edit functions and some of the other cool stuff that exists. Now, if I go into edit, for example, and we say we normalize this first because it looks like it's a little quiet, but if we normalize it, you'll notice we've got some extra volume. Got our samples there playing. And what we can do is we can tweak this again. So let's say we wanted to grungy these drums up or apply some more effects or something. We can resample using other effects, but what's cool inside of Edit is that it has a bitrate kind of reduction or bitrate conversion. So if we want to, gritty these up, we can kind of do that. I wanted to show you that as a function inside of here. You'll notice here it says 13 to 16 is audition. So if you press any of these top 4 pads, doesn't matter which one, they all do the same thing. Basically, we can audition what a new sample rate sounds like. And if we play pads 1 to 12, all the way down the bottom here, you can press any of these again. You will just get the original sample. So as it is, let's listen to the original. Sounds okay. If we listen to, one of these pads at the top, we're going to be listening to 12-bit at 44.1 kilohertz. So let's take a listen to that. Now, not a huge amount of difference there, but if we start to play around with that, and again, this is going to depend on the sample and how high frequency your sample was to begin with. If we drop down and we change something like the sample rate at first, let's reduce the sample rate down. This is the original again. And then let's try the new slightly lower sample rate. So you can hear that start to degrade. It's subtle at this point, but that's what we're doing. We're using like a subtle version of this. Let's drop the sample rate again, and we'll take it all the way down so it halves it. You've got three options, basically. You've got from 44 all the way down to like 1100. That's when you really start to hear some of that crunch start to kick in. But also with the bit rate, we can change that, and you'll notice we can come all the way down from 12 all the way down to 4. If you take it all the way down to 4, it's pretty crazy. But you get the idea. So you can do that, and as soon as you decide on what you want, so in this case, I just want to gritty them a little bit, something pretty subtle. I'm going to go to say 12-bit 2200, or maybe even let's try 10-bit 2200. Very, very subtle, but that's what we'll do there. So I'm going to choose that. I click do it. You'll notice it gives us take 2 here. The original is called take 1, and it doesn't overwrite that sample, which is really nice. It leaves it there. So if you want your original, still have it, and we can skip over to take 2. And I've got that kind of grungier version. So that was just a couple of things I wanted to show you on this device. Let's now go back to our program. So we'll go back to main, and then we can take a look here. So we're going to replace what we initially created. We have these individual drum sounds. I want to take those out because we're just going to record our drum loop in. That's going to be the easiest way. So I'm going to click erase. I can select notes and I can do things, but if I just do it, it erases everything from those 2 bars that we had at the beginning. Now we know that our new loop is automatically set to 80 BPM. It's a perfect loop. We just baked it down. So we can just record that back in, but we will need to assign it first to the program because it's not loaded in currently. If I do mode and program, and we need to be on the right program. Actually, yeah, we have a lot of samples in here. So it doesn't really matter. We can overwrite any of these that we want. Let's just put it onto pad 4, for example. And you'll notice it jumps to pad 4. If I want 14, just jumps to whatever you press. Pad 4, I'm going to look for that particular sample. So take 2 is what we want. We've loaded that. Just use the data wheel to find it. Then I can just make sure it's here. And in the mode and other section for this device, it allows you to do like a one-click stop of all long samples, which I really like, because sometimes you've got like a long sample. On the other MPCs, you have to double-click and do a couple of other things. I can just press stop and it does it. It's in the options. There's a bunch of options you need to play with, but yeah, that's a good one. Do full level. Let's go back into main for a second. We know it's on pad 4 now. We have no other information. We still have all these chops and bits in here, but it doesn't matter. We just want pad 4. We can do record, play start. And there we go. We've recorded that loop in. It fits perfectly. And we've now combined everything down. So if you wanted to save some space, you wanted to get rid of all these chops, you could clean up inside of your project. Just keep your main loop. Just wanted to show you a few things that, yeah, I think are pretty cool. So we've baked all that down. We've now got some drums on pad 1. Let's say we wanted to elaborate on this a little bit. And when I put my sample chops in, I want a little bit more to work with. So we want to extend the bar length because we've only got 2 bars. And maybe I want to work with 4. You'll notice if I scroll up to where bars is and I move the data wheel, opens a window here that will allow me to change that bar length. But you'll notice as soon as I add an extra bar, it gives me a warning saying that what we're doing is we're actually just putting a blank extra bar in because we're not got any recorded information in there. We don't want to add that, of course. What we want is to extend what we already have. So this isn't going to be the option for us, but just bear in mind you can extend your bar length. You can add extra blank bars and then record more drums in or do whatever else you want. So let's cancel this. What we want to do is go to mode and we want to go to sequence edit. And inside of sequence edit, if we go to bars, it allows us to copy bars. At the bottom here, it's asking us what do we want to copy. So I want the first bar, but I also want the second bar because we've got 2 bars. So first bar and the last bar. And then if we move over, I want to make 1 copy of that to make it 4 bars. But of course you could double up, you could triple, whatever you want. And I want to set it so that it's going to add it to sequence 1 after bar 2 and then click do it. And now you'll see we have 4 bars. One thing that's cool about this as well is that with the little arrow cursor, I can jump onto this little grid view And then I can navigate with the wheel here and just scroll along and take a look at the bars that I have set up. Now, because we've only got one drum loop playing, you'll just see one bit of MIDI information. But of course, if I had all my drum sounds in there still, I could see 4 bars worth of drum sounds. And you can scroll by the bar using the bar button. So if you just want to skip to the beginning of a bar, keep in mind as well that this is for when you want to add something in and you don't necessarily want to record, I don't know, the entire loop. You don't want to start, you want to record somewhere in the second bar. I can find an exact step and then do overdub and record. Don't want to do play start at that point. I'd want to do overdub and play. That's going to pick up exactly where the cursor is here, this playhead. And then I can record to a particular part of a sequence or a loop. So keep that in mind as well. We've now put our drums in. We've extended them to 4 bars. It's time to get into picking some vinyl samples and messing around, and we'll take a look at that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do mode, and we're going to go to recording mode. Now, I messed with this before. I don't want it set to my main output. I want it set back to analog, which is going to be the input for my little turntable here. Now, I need to make sure this thing is turned on, which I'm not sure it is. That is now turned on. There'll be a little bit of noise there as we turn this thing on. This is a great little portable turntable. Has a really good sound for a portable turntable, and it has a couple of cool functions, like it has a pitch, so I can pitch up and down, which is great when you want to pitch aside, away from the device. Also has a little EQ button, like a tone button, and it works off batteries. It has a built-in speaker. This one is an Ion USB turntable, but it is exactly the same as the PT01 that you get from Newmark. It's the same company that owns them, so I assume they just rebrand them for some reason. It's got a bunch of inputs and outputs and stuff on here, and I'm currently using the RCA outputs coming to the back of the input on my MPC. Now, hopefully we'll get a little bit of audio here. I'll need to check the record gain level. A couple of other things here. So yeah, your record gain you can set using this dial. So if it's a little bit quiet on the sample, you can bring it up. If you find you're peaking out and you just want to reset the meters, you'll notice here we can reset the peak levels. So when it just had a little bit of loud noise there, showed you where the peak is. In the middle, you will see how much time you have to record. Now with this particular device, it's got 128 megabytes installed of RAM. That was what it came with, which is kind of the max. That gives me roughly 12 minutes of stereo sampling, so loads of time. And if you switch that into mono, then you get something, it's going to double that up, so 12 minutes to 24 minutes worth of mono recording even. So yeah, loads of stereo time, loads of mono time. We can set a threshold underneath, so you can set an input threshold. Let's say you don't want it to record quieter sounds, you want it to wait for a loudness, a certain volume before it begins to record. We can set that using this little meter here. I'm going to set it somewhere. It's not going to matter too much for this, but if I press record, you'll notice it's waiting for the input signal. If you don't want it to do that, of course, you can just set this all the way down. And when you press record, it's going to begin to, start recording straight away. I'm going to leave a little bit of an input signal. It's probably going to kick off quite quickly, though, with the noise of the needle. So let's try and find a sample first before we hit record and see how loud our input is. Trying to avoid my microphone and doing this is a little bit tricky. Okay, that doesn't sound too bad in terms of volume. Hopefully you can hear that with me talking at the same time, but yeah, I'm saying that sounds about right with the volume. Let's look for a sample somewhere. Okay, I think there's going to be something there. I'm not going to be too fussy for this episode because we're just trying to obviously demonstrate this device. I will show you quickly the vinyl cover for this record. I need to do this without hitting the camera and everything else. Hopefully you can see that on screen. It is the Great Galloping Gottschalk. Now, I'm assuming that's how that's pronounced because it's spelt that way. It's spelt Gottschalk. And it's Ivan Davis piano, so keep that in mind. Looks like a charity shop find. And it sounds like that's old classic piano, but those little classic piano chops, I think, will be pretty cool to slice up and play around with. So I'm just going to go with, the second one that we've got here. It's the second track in. Let's record that sample. So we'll set this thing up. Let's press record. Okay, I'm going to say that's good enough. Let's just reach through again, trying not to knock everything over. We've now recorded that. We can name the sample. We can do the same thing with our scroll wheel if we want to. I'm not going to bother with that. Let's just do enter here. And I don't want to put this to a pad. I'm just going to slice this thing up and then we'll create a new program with it. But you can assign to a pad if you like. I'm going to do keep. And of course, we've now put that into our little sample pool. So if we go back to mode and trim, we'll be able to find, and you can see that sample is already there and loaded up for us. So pretty handy stuff. We know we've got a little bit of dead space and also the volume here. I wasn't too sure. So let's do edit, come back up out of this menu and go to, what are we looking for? Normalize. Let's normalize the volume first. Obviously that's given us a bit more volume. And what I want to do is I want to come down and just get rid of the dead space and just do some quick tidying up. So I'm going to move to start point, which is below, and I'm going to scroll along and find where I want it to start. Now there's some notes here, and when I play the pad, you'll hear those. But I think I might just start with the bigger transient. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, pull this back roughly. Sounds good enough. Then we can go to edit, do discard, truncate, get rid of that. So that's going to be good enough just to get rid of that bit of dead space at the beginning. We're now going to go back up a level. And remember what I was saying, if I try and do this now, you'll notice it's just increasing my wave file. I need to do shift and go up a level so I can come across and turn chopping mode on. I'm going to do exactly like we did with the drums here. I'm going to hit slice, work out roughly where I think these transients are going to lie. And, you know, with 16 slices, it's not too bad. It's probably in the right ballpark. Let's move it along a little bit till it's kind of maybe, I'm going to say somewhere around there. I'm probably not going to use all 16 slices, or in this case, it's going to be around 13 slices. I'm just going to use whatever I need so that we can cook something up quite quickly. But around there is going to be good. We'll click do it again. And then just quickly take a look at our start and end point. So this is our first piece. And we can hear that it's got that little end tail in there, which I probably don't want. So I'm going to skip over to the end part. Just move it down. Move back over to the starting point. And I think probably over there will be better on this. Another thing to bear in mind, when you're using your scroll wheel here, if this feels like it's slow, if you've got a sample zoomed way in, you're trying to get across, if you do shift, you can move in much faster, bigger chunks with your scroll wheel, which is cool. So yeah, we can dial this in a little bit quicker. But here, maybe for this one, and I can see the end, I probably don't want that extra note. I just want some little chops. And now let's try this one. If you skip over to the start point, it moves it back to the beginning, of course. And with that one, we'll just tidy that up to here. And again, back to the start point, dial that into probably here. And again, with the end point, maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll just extend that one out a little bit. Leave it so. And back to the start point. And let's just maybe take one last one here. Let's move that one over. It's a very short note. And actually, yeah, one. Let's do this one as well. Just move the end point over a bit. That's going to be enough chops. We've obviously got more that we can play with, but I think that'll be fine for this episode. So we've made the chops. We do a new program. I can name this, mess around with it, but for now, let's just keep moving on. So I'm going to click do it. I know this is called Drum Samp 3. In fact, you know what? Maybe that will get confusing. Let's just call this chop of some sort. I'm going to call it Chop Samp 3. I'm not going to worry too much. Click enter. Click do it. And now we've made a new program. Now, one thing, because I wasn't being careful what I did here, I just need to make sure that all of my drum tracks, my chop tracks, are all connected with the right program. So if I press play now, you'll notice what it's doing. It's playing the wrong piece. And that's just because I was being careless with it. But as long as I go back to drums here, find my drum sample, which is what we want here. That puts everything back as it should be. Go back to chops. And then with chops, I now want to associate that new chop sample, or whatever we called it. Chop Samp 3 is going to be associated here, so we've got our chops ready. And again, with this, we're going to do mode and program. You'll notice that all of these samples overlap. They're not in a mute group. So yeah, we're getting a bunch of like colliding samples. Now there are mute groups in here, so you can come in and you can set individual mute groups, which is very handy because sometimes inside of one program, you want 3 samples here in mute group 1, you want these in a different one. But a very easy thing, which is nice about this, and another little tip is that if you're somewhere down at the bottom of your program, you can do shift and the up arrow and jump straight to the top. If we come across here to where it says poly and just put that into mono, that instantly puts every sample into like a choke group. So really easy, nice speedy workflow there. If we come down underneath and we click one of these parameters, doesn't matter which one, but say it was level. In this case, actually, let's move over to tune. I want to be able to tune these samples because I like to tune my samples, play around with them. What is really great on this is that we can do shift and all, and it's going to select all of my samples. So when I tune them, you can hear them all being pitched at exactly the same time, really speedy. And I love the fact that I can then just scroll to other parameters. So something like the level, let's say I needed them all to be a bit louder. I can do that. Or I can even go into the next menu. I wanted to play with a little attack here. Let's say there was some clicks and pops that I didn't like at the beginning of the sample. If I come to something like the attack and then just increase this, and I'll do it to an extreme just so you can hear the samples. Almost sounds like they're in reverse, but it is because it's just putting a long fade into those samples. Now that's overkill, but something just like a 1 or a 2 would get rid of any unwanted clicks and pops. And we can do that to every single sample inside of the program. I don't need to do it individually. It's not a pain in the bum. So we've got that set up. The other thing that we can do while we're in here is that you have some effects. Now, when I've got something like this, which is just like a little chop on its own, a little bunch of little short samples, might be cool to add some effects, and it gives us a chance to take a look at some of the effects on this device. It doesn't have a huge list, but for me, as a sampling head, vinyl, and doing this kind of stuff, it has plenty. For each individual track, you have things like high pass, low pass filters. There's a bunch of stuff in here that you get as well, but you also have some effects. And the effects can be applied to a pad, an individual pad on that kind of basis, or we can apply them to an entire track. The only thing you need to bear in mind there is what track you're applying them to. So if we go back to main, this is track 2 is where my chops and my samples are. So when I go back to mode and program, if I want to come over here and I want to apply an effect to all of these samples, I'm going to do that on a track basis. I come across to where it says effects, it's currently off. I can enable FX1. Now, we're not going to dive super deep into this, but if we go into mode and take a look at the effects here, we have FX1 and FX2, and it's kind of like the SP404 Mark II. You have an FX1 slot, which can be independent, and you can send, tracks and pads to that particular effect. Then we have FX2, where you can do exactly the same, and you can kind of keep those independent for, obviously, independent control, or you can actually set them in line. So here it says FX1 to FX2, so you can send them in line so that if you want to put 2 effects on the same pad, you can do that, and FX1 will run into FX2, and you can affect things that way. I'm not going to deep dive into that because, it can be a bit complicated to explain if you're not familiar with it, but keep it in mind that you can have them independent or together. You also have some master effects, which are cool. We've got an EQ and a compressor and stuff like that. But if we go to effects 1 here, I can come down and I can enable this. So I'm going to just enable FX1. I've got bit grunger, 4-band EQ, compressor, phase shifter, tremolo, flying pan, reverb, delay. Not a huge list, but it's enough for me. If I wanted to do a delay, which is what I want, I'm going to select that. Then when I go to FX1, I can tweak the parameters of that particular effect. So I maybe want to sync it to the BPM. I think maybe try a little less on the feedbacks. That's quite heavy with feedback. And something like the level will dial back. And because I've been into my mode and my program, and I've basically sent this effect over already, I should be able to hear it with my chops. So you can hear that they're starting to delay, and we get that effect. I'll leave it like that for now, but just keep in mind there's loads of parameters, loads of stuff you can tweak. I'll go back to, say, the mode and the program again. What's cool is it is like a send effect, so you can adjust the amount, how much of this you want to send through. So yeah, you can kind of tweak it in here as well, which is cool. I'm going to leave it at 30. It sounds about enough for me, but yeah, you can turn it right off. You can do other stuff inside of the program. We go back to main. We now have 2 tracks. We've got our drums that we created. It's time to start putting some of these chops over the top, see if we can work something very basic out. I pitched everything down by 4 semitones. I'll see what that sounds like. We'll just audition and see if we can come up with something. First thing here is we have a problem with volume because the sample chops are very loud, the drums are a little bit quieter. I just want to even that out. We're not going to be mixing things in this episode because I'm using headphones, but it gives me a chance to show you mode, and there is also a mixer view. Now this is a pad mix view, so each individual pad can be tweaked, but if you do mode and you do pad 4, there is also a track mixer view, so I can just tweak the individual sounds of an entire track. In this case, one thing I want to show you as well, a couple of other things. If I go into mode and go back to the program, it depends. This is currently for our sample chops. Let's go back to main and select our drums. So let's go over to drums. I can go into mode and program and go back to the sample. You'll notice by default, which you could set your template to be different, this is currently on level 80. Now, I only want the loop. I don't want to affect all the other chops that we're not using, but on the loop here with take 2, I'm going to set this to full 100% volume. Just gives us a little bit more volume for the drums. If I come back to main here for a second, and let's go back over to our chops. Just want to try those now with this. Chops are still quite loud. So again, mode and program, now we got these selected. I can do shift and all, and I'm just going to reduce the volume of these samples down a little bit. That's going to be good enough for this exercise. So we've now set up a couple little bits of volume. As I said, I could do that inside of the program or with these mixer views, which would be better for obviously general mixing later on. We can now play this and yeah, just see if I can work something out very quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because of the length of the video, but let's see if we can come up with a basic pattern. Going to be good enough for this episode, so let's record that in. I'm going to keep timing correction on. We're still going to be a little bit lazy because the timing correction will still be as we set it earlier. 16th notes, a little bit lazy on the grid, a little bit of swing. Do we want to make those? I might even shift that up to 2 later, so they're coming, yeah, they're going to be recorded slightly off the grid, a little bit lazy. Let's close that, see how that works out for us. So we'll do record. I didn't like that take. Let's go back. I'd forgotten completely what we played. So let's do undo, which will take everything out of the sequence. Try that again. And again, I've forgotten. Yeah, okay, that's going to be better. Undo the sequence, let's try again. Yeah, that's the pattern that I like, but obviously we need to do that for 4 bars. Just wanted to do it one last time, so I've got it kind of in my memory. Okay, going to be good enough for this. I tried to switch up the very last pad just so that the 4 bars had a slight variation towards the end, but good enough for this example. As I said, we don't want to get too lost in the process here. And then what we can do is we need to just add in a couple of other elements to sort of finish off. I want to add a new track. And whenever you highlight something here, so anything that's got some written information, particularly like your chops and programs, if you click window, you'll notice it opens up like a track list, so there'll be something that you can look at. If we drop down and we go to track 3 and we just scroll over, creates a new track for us, and then we can name that whatever we want. In this case, I think we're just going to add a bass sample in. So quickly, I'm just going to put in bass. Oops. Let's go back one. Change that to bass. And then I'll delete everything else out like that. So the track is now called bass, and we can close that. Same deal over here with our programs. If I use the window, I can now add a new program where I want to put my bass sample. Scroll down here. I don't even need to scroll. I think I can just click new and it will put that in. Or do I need to be here? Anyway, let's see. We'll do new. We can call this something. So we'll call this bass. And yeah, let's do that. And it's got samp4 at the end. I'm just going to leave that. That'll do. I want to create a drum type. So of, drum program. Let's do that. You can create an instrument type as well. And quickly, while we're here, let's just talk about that. This actually has quite a few types. So you've got drum programs, you have these instrument type of programs. We're not going to cover all of these, but just so that you know that they're there. We also have MIDI, so we can create a MIDI program, a chord program, so you can do chords on this thing. And you can also do an arpeggiator. So yeah, pretty handy. It's quite a good few functions. I'm going to keep it as a drum program. And what we need to do is we need to load a sample in there. And I think what we want to do is just add a little bit of bass, because this is all kind of high-end piano samples. We don't have any bass line. See if we can make a very quick, crude bass line out of something. We'll go to mode and load. And somewhere in here, there should be a bass folder. And that's going to be good enough. Let's just choose that one. We won't be fussy. I'm going to put it onto pad 1, click yes. And then when we go to main, we have a new program, a new track with a bass sample. Now, I don't want this sample to overlap because it's a bass sample. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do mode and program, skip up to the top and move over and put it into mono mode. So that sample will only play once each time I press it. It's not going to overlap, create a bunch of unwanted frequencies. And then we need to use something like 16 levels so that we can, set this up like an instrument. So if I do 16 levels, just want to make sure that that is on the bass pad. That's what we want. I want to set this, rather than being velocity, we want to set this to tune. And we'll turn it on. We'll leave it where it is. It's telling us that the original keypad is number 4. So we'll turn that on, which generally should mean that 4 is the sample. And this should be lower. And anything else should be higher. And you can hear that in like chromatic mode. We don't need full level enabled if we don't want. We can have some variation in velocity there, but I'm going to keep it like that just for now for simplicity. The other thing that we want to do here is play around with the sort of the tuning of it, but that's only if we can't get it to tune exactly right the first time. So we're going to play, we'll just audition this. I'll see if I can work out a very simple bass line, see what happens. So let's play our beat. Now this is a pretty common problem here, that what we have is a bass sample that isn't tuned correctly to the vinyl. Now, I know the bass sample is in, it's tuned to C. I know that because I made the bass sample originally. But, of course, we've played around with the pitch of this old record. We've no idea what that was like. And I suppose at least this gives us an opportunity to try a couple of other things. So if we do mode and program, I'm going to come along to the bass sample, which we have here. Now, tuning here, if you select, obviously, the bigger value, takes you up and down in semitones, but then we can fine tune over here, and we can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and fine tune one of these samples till it sounds like the general bass sample is fitting better with the, obviously, the vinyl chops that we've got. So let's play that, see if we can tune it in a little bit. Something like that will be nice and simple. But yeah, kind of pitching that down, fine tune, we can get that in line with what we want to do. So now we can record that in. I think I'm just going to go with that, very simple. Those two pads, I think it was. Go back to main, record. And I've got the order of that wrong. I think we must have been starting with the higher pad. Let's try that. Might not be 100% perfect. We could obviously create something more exciting in terms of a bass line and spend more time tuning it, but I just wanted you to get the idea that we can bring that in. We can get our sample kind of right. I think it's overall the bass, again, with headphones on, it's hard to tell, but I think it's probably a little bit loud. So on the track level here, if we do mode and pad 4, I can just reduce some of these volumes. So let's listen to the whole track and just tweak some of the volumes as we go. Good enough for now. Of course, we can add compression, we can do some other things, and maybe I'll just turn the compressor on at the end just for fun so that you can see what that sounds like. But that is now an extra track, so we've got drums, we've got some chops, and yeah, we've got some bass line as well now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more track in, so we'll just call this, I don't know, let's call it extras or something. We'll put a couple of other little elements in, nothing crazy, just so that we can wrap up on this episode because it's been long enough. But I'm hoping that it's give you, some insight into what this particular device is like. As I said, keep in mind this is the the JJOS2XL operating system, the full version. I do believe the free version is more limited. It doesn't have quite so many functions of this. I think it's worth the upgrade price. But it is quite expensive. Here in the UK, it worked out about £90, I think, because it's $123 or something to get. So let's, what are we doing here? Let's keep this going. So we'll call this extra. It's because I keep going to move the cursor with this. I definitely need to get used to it. We'll do extra. And I'll skip across and I'll just delete out that. So I'm just going to call this extra. Whatever we want to add extra into our program. I'll close that up. Again, we're going to need a new program to go along with that. So I'll come down and let's see what we got here. I'll add a new one. I'll have to name this as well, just to be slightly organized. Otherwise, I'll be well confused. And I'm just going to call it EX. And then let's just take out. I should have left the sample thing in there. I'm just going to call it EXS. I'll remember what that is. Just needs to coincide with the track. We'll click drum because that's what we're going to create, a drum program. And then what we can do is, we can add in some samples again. So we're going to go to mode, back to our loading page. Doesn't really matter what we choose for this, just a couple of, samples of some kind. I think in my drums folder, I've got a few things. If I go back here, actually, there's some static noise. So maybe a little bit of vinyl static. We'll put some of that in. Number 2 sounds good enough. Want to load that onto my first pad, click yes. While we're here, we'll find some other things. And I think in my perk and effects folder, just got a couple of weird sound effects and stuff. Let's see what this one is. Okay, that one sounds actually okay. I'm going to put that onto pad 2. So we'll click load, pad 2, yes. And then let's look for just one more. What else is here? Okay, that one's kind of fun. I'm going to load that. And of course, it's going to go onto pad 3. So we've loaded in 3 samples for our effects program. Let's go back to mode or even to main. And now we can record those in. So what have we got here? This is the static. Let's record that first. So I'm going to record. Now, I wasn't sure how long that sample was, so I put it in at the beginning of the first bar, and then again at the beginning of the third bar, just to make sure it fills the entire loop. Then what we can do is we got this sample here. remember what I was saying about making sure 16 levels is off. Okay, that sounds pretty cool, but I want to try and pitch this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to mode. Just need to check that for a second. I'm going to go to mode here. And what I will do is we will change the pitch of this while the sample is playing. So let's just try tuning this one sample while this is going. Okay, -3 semitones I think works. We're going to do mode and we're going to go to trim. And I don't want all of this sample. I think we'll skip down to the start point and take maybe from here somewhere. I'll try it from there. Let's record that in. Probably just going to put it again, sort of maybe at the beginning of the first bar, beginning of the third bar. Let's do record, play start. Actually, we need to do overdub here. So overdub and play start. Okay, that fits well enough for now. It's got some kind of echo and delay in there, which ideally you probably want to use the echo or the delay inside of the device to make sure it's time stretched and, you know, fits with the BPM that we're working with. But for now, we'll just do a quick and easy hack like that. So next is this pad here. And because it's just kind of like a weird breathy vocal thing, I don't think we'll bother pitching it. Let's just try it as it is and record that in again for time. So we'll do overdub again. And I'll probably just put this at the very beginning, I think. Good enough for this example. So that would be the basic beat sketch that I would create here. I'm not going to go any further. Of course, we can, you know, tweak it and EQ and do all kinds of stuff. We can mix it properly. But for this episode, I think that's good enough to give you some idea of what this device is about. Didn't really touch on banks, but of course, we've got banks here where you can add plenty of samples and all that kind of stuff. One thing that I did want to show you, now this will sound a little bit strange because I'm only going to be tweaking the chops and not the bass line as well. So it's going to kind of come out of key. But I just want to show you what you can do with the Q-Link slide as well, I remember, because I think it's kind of fun. We come back over and go to, say, something like our chops program. And in the bottom corner here, actually, we can stay over here, where we can see Q1. This is our Q-Link 1. I can set this to tuning. And just watch what happens as I play around with the tuning here. Let's just see if we can set it. Where is the middle? That's probably roughly about the middle. But just take a listen to what happens as I play around with the tuning while this is going. You can hear there that we can pitch those sample chops in real time while that is moving around. One, that is cool because maybe you just want to try a different pitch as the sample's playing, see what it sounds like. But also, this can be recorded as automation. So we can essentially press record, overdub, and we could record these movements in. And that's great because not only do you get tuning here, but you get filters, you get all kinds of stuff. So if you want to put some interesting like moments in your beat, you can do all of that. And you can do that on like a track level, which I thought was pretty cool, especially that you can record the automation of it. I think that's very cool. Anyway, I think I'm going to sign off there. One last couple of things, one last couple of things, that doesn't make any sense, but a couple of other things here. Quickly is the song mode. So let's say we had decided this was going to be our song. We would use song mode like I showed you before. We would do mode and song. I can build up as many of these loops. I could copy, make a new sequence. And then you can start using the building blocks to put your song together. Another cool thing is that you have the track mute ability like other MPCs. So if you've created a duplicate of your sequence, I can just use a track mute here, and whichever pad I press, it will mute out. So if I do this, you will notice I am muting out the drums. Take the bass line out. get the idea. So you could put your track mutes in, you can build things that way. All pretty simple, standard MPC affair stuff. But yeah, nice and easy. And keep in mind again that if we go back to mode and the song mode, that if you wanted to mix down your entire song, you could do that to an audio file. You can also do convert here, where you'll notice we can convert from a song to a sequence. There's some other options that you get as well. So plenty to play with. And finally, I just want to turn on the master effects just so you've got an idea of what they sound like, and we'll kind of play out on the beat. So if we go to mode and effect, I'll go to the master, and what I'll do here is I will turn on the EQ, and I'm also going to turn on the compressor. Now, they're a little bit heavy-handed, especially with like the gain and stuff, and because we haven't left any headroom here, so I'm just going to nip the gain down a touch, and generally it puts quite a lot of low end in here, so I'll take that down a little bit. I'm going to bypass it. Just take a quick listen to this on and off. So this is it before. Now, they're not the best settings for this particular track. Of course, you want to come in and play around with your attack, your threshold, all that kind of stuff. But it is a pretty nice sounding compressor that it has in here. Same with the EQ. I think it sounds pretty good. Now, the EQ, of course, doesn't do too much to the sound. But yeah, the sort of default settings give you a little increase in sort of high-end gain. Gives you quite a good thump in the low end. I'll put that back to 6 where it puts it. But normally, it's a little bit heavy if you haven't left any headroom. Let's just try that. But actually, it's not too bad on there. Let's take the high end down a touch. For me, it's probably a little bit crazy in the highs. We'll take those down a little bit. Anyway, you get the idea. I just wanted to show you those master effects. Cool that you've got them set up on the master channel. Good to go. And of course, you can track your beats out into Ableton. You can do all kinds of cool stuff. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to play out on the beat. I'll use the track mutes, just so that we can kind of pretend like we've made a bit of a song. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know of any tips and tricks and things that you can give me in the comments. Still getting to grips with this thing. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next episode.